I've put this off for far too long and it's time for this channel's first ever kit bash. Wish me luck. Welcome back to Anvil of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets, and as I said before, today I'm going to attempt to do a kit bash. I've seen some really cool videos on kit bashing, and in the wise words of Miniac, a simple head swap is probably the best way to attempt your first kit bash. But I like to make things difficult and really hard for myself, as you guys already know, so I'm going to attempt something a little bit bigger. There's a classic mini out there which I haven't been able to get my hands on, and that is the Dwarf Throne of Power. I did have a few opportunities when I first got in the hobby to get it, but I thought it was overpriced, and looking back on that now, it was dirt cheap. So I thought today I'd make my own. Now, over the past few years, I've been collecting bits and pieces, and recently one of my awesome Patreon members sent me a pile of dwarfs that he wasn't going to paint, and he gifted them to me, so thanks so much, mate. I appreciate it. When I received these dwarves, it kind of occurred to me that I now had enough to create a throne of power, or attempt to create a throne of power. Now, I'm going to set myself a few rules when creating this miniature, and that is that I want it to look like it's from the period like the 90s or the early 2000s and really fit in with the old Hammer aesthetic. And the second rule is that I wanted to create something that looked like it was from an old Golden Demon competition. I was flicking through some white dwarfs recently, and there's some really awesome pieces in there, lots of kit bashes and a few dioramas, so I'm going to put a little bit more effort into this guy as well. Anyway, that's enough lollygagging, and let's get straight into it. Now, first up, I want to build the throne, and I'm going to put that on like a little cart. I found this really awesome pony and mining cart from the Battle for Skull Pass box set on eBay a few years ago, and I've always dreamed about using it in something, so I thought this would fit it absolutely perfectly. I also have this Thorgrim mini from an accidental buy on Facebook Marketplace, this old Marauder dwarf crossbowman smoking a pipe, and some random plastic dwarf warriors. Now, you do learn a lot about yourself when you're trying something new, and I learned that I'm scared to chop up miniatures. I don't know why, but I feel really guilty when I start chopping up miniatures, but once I started and I started chopping everything and getting into it, I stopped being a little bitch and I got over it. So first up, I'll make the centerpiece and the hardest part of the build, Thorgrim's throne. I want this to be pulled by the pony, so the mining cart will need some modifications to fit the throne. I'm going to use the chassis, so I remove the big tub and sand back some of the marks and then glue the two pieces together. So there were some bits and pieces that I couldn't get my hands on, and I would have loved to get my hand on a pre-made throne. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one of those, so I'm going to attempt to make one myself using polymer clay. I have used this stuff before, and I had a bunch left over after my attempt at making a miniature video, so why not use it up? I'll start building the base of the throne, and I want these to kind of look like stone tiles. I measure the size of the minecart chassis and draw it down on a white piece of paper using a pencil. Then I squish my clay down over the template until it's nice and flat, and I get this great little outline. Next, I cut out the shape, making sure it fits nicely, and then I start smoothing it over and shaping it to resemble a stone tile. The first tile is done, and it's time to make a seat, so I measured out where I wanted the seat to fit, and then I did the same tracing technique. One thing I did learn in this kit bashing process is that double checking measurements and using your minis for size references is pretty important. I always slapped my Thorgrim mini down to make sure he fit on the seat nicely and other pieces weren't too large compared to him. Now it's time to create the back part of the throne to give Thorgrim some much needed support. Being grumpy all day can really give you a sore back. I'm going to keep this the same width as the tiles, and I want it to be about a centimeter taller than Thorgrim's helmet. I measure it all up, and like the original throne, I want to give it 3 sharp points, and I try as hard as I can to make them evenly spaced. Once the back of the throne was cut out, I then smoothed it all over. Then I went back to my original tiles and gave them little nicks and lines just to give them a worn look. Once I was happy with how my sculpting was looking, it was time to throw it in the oven. Now make sure when you're baking your polymer clay you follow the instructions on the pack, because I have noticed there are a heap of different temperatures and times people recommend baking them for, but I think if you just stick to the packet, that's probably the best way to do it. While the bits are baking, I want to create a large frame for the throne to sit in, so I trimmed off some of the mining cart's fancy bits, including the dragon statues, but I put those to the side because I'll be using those later. Also, I'm using a 1200 grit sandpaper to smooth the sides and edges. Unfortunately, I got preoccupied when I had these bits in the oven and they burnt. I know, I'm an idiot. But there were some bits I still could use. I just had to sand back the bubbles off them. So I was going to use the stone tile bits, but the throne itself was completely kaput. It was useless, so I made another one. And this time I tried to put a little gem on it. So most of my bits for the throne are ready to go, and I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty nervous about this. I don't know how it's going to go. One thing I did notice when I got my burnt throne base out of the oven was that it was a little low and would get in the way of the large frame part I cut out for the minecart, so I made a new tile square just to elevate it a bit. I then glued it to the base and stuck on my well done tiles and seat. Then I slid the larger mining cart back frame part in and glued it all together. I trimmed out some rectangular plastic bits to cover the sides of the throne and to give it some armrests. I used some liquid green stuff to fill the gaps in, and once that was dry I hit it with some more sandpaper just to get a smooth finish. At this point I felt the throne was looking pretty bare and needed some more fancy bits and pieces. I was thinking some trims would look good around the outside of the throne. I reached for the polymer clay again and made some sort of shelves for the outside of the cart part. I used my hand drill, wire and super glue to secure all these extras to the sides, and then it was time to glue the dragon parts I trimmed off before together and add them to the back part of the stone shelf. To add some more flair to the throne, I pinched this banner pole decoration from the pile of dwarfs and then carefully trimmed off the wings, as I'll use them for later for the side of the chair. I then cleaned it up and stuck it to the back of the throne. Using more wire and glue, I stuck down the back of the chair to the seat, and I want this to look nice and regal, so I fixed the wings from the banner pole to the sides. Everything was coming together nicely, but I still wanted to give the throne some character, so I decided to go one step further and add a couple more bits. I want to have a kind of lookout deck on the back of the throne where my dwarf crossbowman can stand and smoke his pipe. Again, using polymer clay, I made a timber deck by running lines with my sculpting tool to make a wood-like texture. And once that was baked and nice and hard, I then glued it to the back of the cart. So this big hurdle was now over. I was pretty happy with how it was looking, and it's time to make the pony look a little bit more royal and give him a dwarf handler. I dug out this dwarf and his pose was absolutely perfect. The way his left arm was placed would be great for holding a rope, and his right arm looked like he could have a big old axe on his shoulder. I gave him a wash in some alcohol and then trimmed off a pretty fancy double axe off another dwarf and checked if it all lined up. I then gave that a bath as well and glued it all together and reattached this short king's arm. The bag of plastic dwarfs had plenty of goodies inside, and I found this dragon-like horn. I thought it'd be a great banner pole for the pony and it would really jazz the little fella up. I carefully trimmed it off, cleaned it up, and slapped it on the back of the pony. It is large, but I think it works well and ties to the dragons on the throne. Before I paint, I want to prep the base. To do this, I semi-milled the model and place it to where I want it to sit on the base using blue tack. I'm going to try and make this base a little more interesting than the classic goblin green, so I'm going to slip on some stones, slop on some PVA glue, and slap on some beach sand. So all the kit bashing is now done and it's time to slap some paint on these minis. But before we get into that, make sure you hit the like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far. And if you would like, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all my videos. Also, these videos do take a little while to create, so I would love if you share them with your friends. I'd really appreciate it. It just gets the channel out there and it makes this all worthwhile for myself. Anyway, let's put some paint on the pony. Now, I won't go into too much detail with the painting, as you guys get that most weeks from myself, but if I'm going to paint a pony, I'm going to do it right. So let's refer to the pony color chart to make sure this little fella gets the right colors. As you can see, there are a few choices, but today I think I'm going to go with flaxen chestnut. Flaxen chestnut. I use base colors like Mornfang brown for the coat and Xandri dust for the blonde hair. I also decided it's probably best to tackle the true metallic metals all at once and paint the throne at the same time. I was a bit nervous that the throne would look odd and resemble a pile of Lego, but I kept thinking to myself, I can paint myself out of this, and if I just stick to the process, everything should come out fine. I decided to go with a green and red theme for the throne and pony, similar to what's on the box art of the original Throne of Power. I went with the base color of Warboss green and Lauren green mix because I wanted my greens to be a bit more dull and to resemble a painted wood. After a few hours of applying base coats, it was now time to hit them with some washes, which is always my favorite part of the painting process. Once that was done, it was time to highlight. Now, I have a mad case of PTSD when painting horses. When I first started my painting journey, I attempted 2 horses straight out of the gate, and I wasn't really happy with how they turned out, and it scarred my weak little mind. I didn't have a clue about highlight placement back then. So when painting this little fella, I'm keeping all those edge highlights towards the tops of the muscles. It's a lesson I wish I knew from the beginning. Once he was finished, I decided to go hard on some freehands on the throne and to use some jagged triangle patterns to try fit in with the old world dwarfs aesthetic. I also highlighted the stone areas with some stonewall grey and edge highlighted the lot. It was slowly coming to life, but one thing was letting it down, and that was the back of the seat. It didn't look right to me, but my misso came to the rescue and she suggested to make it look like timber paneling. My hero Juan Hidalgo has a great tutorial on this effect with a shield, so go take a look at his channel for all the details. I'm just placing lines on the back of the chair and highlighting them up with some moot green. I added some more dwarf runes here and there, and after recently watching The Hobbit again, I thought it would be cool to make the little gem on the back of the throne look like the Arkenstone or some sort of gem the dwarf stole off the elves. To finish, I highlighted the true metallics, and this chestnut pony and his little throne were all done, and it was time to move on to some chubby little boys. Like always, I do my skin tones first, and this gave me some time to think about what colour scheme I wanted for the dwarf's clothing. In the end, I decided to keep them the same as the box art and go for a classic blue and white scheme. This will make them pop against the greens and reds of the throne. I then started furiously applying my base coats because I was getting a little bit tired. And this project was taking me much longer than what I thought it would. At this point, I had to put the dwarfs down because I had to travel for work to the Big Smoke, but while I was there, I managed to go to a bigger hobby shop and I found some really cool little flowers and terrain bits, and I've never used these before, so I'm looking forward to putting these on my base for this miniature. Upon my triumphant return to the north, I spent a few days going hard applying washes and highlights. I was pretty motivated to get this project finished because I had spent way too long on it. In a weird way, this project did feel like a kind of Golden Demon practice piece. I know it's not up to the crazy standard of Golden Demon, but I've always dreamed about entering. And I know I have a long way to go, but creating things like this and pushing myself is the only way to really get there. So who knows, maybe one day I'll get the chance to jump on a long plane ride and enter and maybe see a few of you there. I finished painting those chubby little grumps and it was time to tackle parts of the base which would be hard to get to once the mini was on. I dry brushed the stones first using Stonewall Grey and then mixing in small amounts of white, and then I painted the base with some Xandri dust. It's time for the fun part, and that is assembling this throne of power. I used my hand drill, wire and a fair bit of super glue to place the minis where I wanted them. The front dwarf also needed some rope, so I used wire and bent it over his shoulder, then glued it into place under the pony's bridle. I then glued down some more sand to cover up any gaps and gave it all a heavy wash of Agrax Earthshade. Now, I've never really put a huge amount of effort into my bases before, as I tend to go just for a goblin green base or a tan base for my more recent minis, but today I'll be using a variety of basing grasses and those flowers I got on my work trip. I first give the base a dry brush of Xandri dust and bone white, then I apply some PVA glue to where I want my gaming grass. I use tweezers to slap on the grass. I do find tweezers give me a little bit more control, and this stuff can get everywhere, so every little bit helps. Next, I throw on a couple yellow flowers, then some white flowers, and to finish off, a little tuft. And to tie it all into the base, I apply some Agrax Earthshade, and I just put that on the bottom of each little bit of tuft or the flowers, and I also give them a trim here and there. And after that was all done, it was time to paint the rim of the base goblin green, and that was pretty much it. And here it is, here is my Kitbash Dwarf Throne of Power. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end, my dudes. I really appreciate it. And if you do like videos like this, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to create more things like this for you guys. Also, like always, I want to say a massive thank you to all my Patreon members. I couldn't do these videos without you guys, and thank you so much for the support. If you want to join the Envelope of Doom Patreon, the link is in the description, and I'll see you on the Discord. Anyway, my dudes, I'm out of here. Take it easy, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.